Can you imagine leading the Formula One World Championship and suddenly, in just 3 races, seeing your car become undrivable and your team doing nothing about it? That's happening to Oscar Piastri just before the 2025 Las Vegas GP. And what's happening behind the scenes could change the way we view McLaren forever. Oscar Piastri began the 2025 season as one of the top contenders for the world title. Not only was its performance consistent, it exuded a quiet confidence that only riders have who know they have a machine capable of conquering the world. In the first races, the Australian made no mistakes. In fact, he achieved what many considered unthinkable, beating his own teammate Lando Norris in pure pace in several key sessions. However, that perfection soon began to crumble. The turning point was the Austin GP. There, for the first time, Piastri showed visible signs of frustration. On the track, he was seen struggling more than usual, and on the filtered radios, his tone began to sound different. Short, tense, almost listless. But the real meltdown came in Mexico, a track where rear axle performance is crucial due to the altitude and compression of the track. There, Piastri's performance plummeted. He went from fighting for victories to fighting to get into the top 5. And the most alarming thing, for no apparent reason. In parallel, his teammate Lando Norris began to chain outstanding performances, closing the difference point by point, until completely reversing it. Now, on the way to Las Vegas, the driver who seemed to have the title assured is 24 points behind the new championship leader, his own teammate. The devastating thing about this story is not just the drop in the points table. It's the way it happened. The public narrative spoke of bad luck, complicated track conditions, even strategic errors. But internally, a much more disturbing truth was already known. Oscar Piastri was driving a defective car. A car that, instead of propelling it to the championship, was silently sabotaging it. For weeks, McLaren engineers reviewed the data without finding anything conclusive. What seemed like a minor setup mismatch turned out to be a much more serious problem. A microscopic crack in the hydraulic actuator of the rear suspension system. The defect was located in the pressure valve, a component that regulates the behavior of the rear axle under extreme loads. This microfracture was not detected in routine tests, much less in post-race superficial analyses. But its impact was devastating. This anomalous behavior became especially noticeable on the Austin and Mexico circuits. Both share a considerable altitude and a low-grip surface, conditions in which rear axle stability becomes critical. While Lando Norris' car offered stable and predictable performance, Piastri's car reacted as if it had a life of its own. In telemetry, barely a deviation was noticeable. But in the cabin, every hard braking was a leap into the void, every quick corner a leap of faith. Piastri's race engineer, Tom Stallard, confirmed that the fault had been identified for at least 5 Grands Prix. And what began as a small margin of error ended up completely conditioning the Australians' performance. In that time, McLaren made multiple interventions on the cars, including aerodynamic updates, improvements in tire thermal management and minor balance adjustments. But they did not replace the damaged component. Because, whatever the truth, what has happened is not just a technical failure. It's a crack in McLaren's credibility. And more importantly, he is a direct threat to the morale of one of the most promising drivers of his generation. Because if a team doesn't protect its own talent, what message is it sending to the rest of the field? In modern Formula One, trust between the driver and his team is not a luxury. It is an absolute necessity. A rider needs to feel that his team is not only delivering the best machine possible, but is also willing to protect his competitive integrity at any cost. When that trust is broken, everything else falls apart, even if the car remains competitive on paper. As the Grand Prix passed, his body language transformed. The driver who used to walk purposefully towards the paddock now did so with his shoulders slightly slumped. The interviews that were previously slow and confident became short, evasive monologues. He no longer spoke clearly about his expectations. He began to use phrases like, "We have to review the data," "We didn't have the right balance," or "I didn't find the rhythm." All veiled ways of saying, "They didn't give me a car worthy of competing." Internally, his inner circle began to wonder if McLaren was systematically prioritizing Norris. The one who was once his partner was now his direct rival. And every time Norris's car received an upgrade before his, or every time the Australian strategy was compromised by dubious decisions from the wall, the noise grew. But beyond internal politics, what caused the most damage was the silence. Piastri did not receive a full explanation of the technical problem until it was too late. The damaged component remained in the car for weeks, and although it was later replaced, the damage had already been done. Because in Formula One, when a driver loses faith in his car, there is no immediate return. The relationship between man and machine is broken, and rebuilding it can take more than a season. And this distrust also extends to the technical environment. If the pilot feels that his feelings are not valued, that his warnings are ignored or minimized, communication with the team becomes cloudy. Every wall decision is questioned. Every radio instruction is interpreted with distrust. And each silence becomes an implicit message of abandonment. With just 3 races remaining on the 2025 calendar, the championship is far from decided. But Oscar Piastri's situation within McLaren is increasingly fragile. The fight is no longer just for points, podiums, or victories. It's a battle for narrative control of your own career. Because when a driver of his talent begins to be seen as a victim of his own team, the questions stop focusing on sports and begin to point to the institutional. The calendar doesn't let up. Las Vegas represents technical hell for any car with tire temperature problems or unstable rear traction. And the MCL39, even under optimal conditions, has proven to have an extremely narrow operating window. This means that if the team doesn't find the exact setup, the car can become untreatable. And now, knowing that Piastri's technical management record has been questionable, to say the least, the alarm bells are going off. From a championship point of view, the math still gives him options. But the human factor is not measured in points. It is measured in trust. And that, today, is broken. Piastri has the talent to reverse any situation on the track. What he does not have is the guarantee that his team will support him in key moments. And without that, any attempt at a comeback becomes a lonely mission, with a car that has been its worst enemy in recent weeks. But there's an even bigger risk, one that transcends the season. If McLaren does not properly manage this conflict, it could open an irreparable wound with its young star. Because in Formula One, loyalty is not unconditional. All drivers want to win. And if Oscar Piastri begins to believe that this dream will not be possible with the team that formed him, it will not take long for him to listen to other offers. Mercedes, Ferrari, and even a rebuilding Red Bull would be willing to bet on a talent like his if McLaren stops protecting him. At the level of public image, the damage is also significant. McLaren was coming off a near-perfect 2024 season, crowned with the Constructors' title, and projected as the new dominant power. But the way they have handled Piastri's technical conflict has called into question his leadership abilities. The narrative changed. We are no longer talking about the fastest car, but about the team that ignores the problems of one of its drivers. And in a paddock where reputation is as valuable as points, that can have devastating consequences. For Piastri, the next 3 weekends will not only define his position in the championship, they will also define their role within McLaren. If he achieves a comeback, if he shows that he can overcome the technical and emotional abandonment he has suffered, his status as future champion will be consolidated. But if the team fails him again, if internal decisions continue to harm him, we could be witnessing the beginning of a separation that, although silent, is developing race by race. What is at stake is not just the title. It is the story of a pilot who was betrayed by his own machine. And from a team that, having everything to dominate an era, is beginning to lose control of its most important narrative. What happened to Oscar Piastri in this final stage of the 2025 season is not just another episode on the Formula One calendar. It is a clear warning of how even the most technologically advanced teams can fall into human errors as basic as omission, disorganization, or poorly managed prioritization. And when that happens at the critical moment of a world championship battle, the consequences are not only felt in the results. They are felt on the pilot's skin. Oscar Piastri is not simply losing points. You're wasting time. Time of his career. Development time. Time in which he could be establishing himself as one of the best of his generation. And that time in Formula One is not recovered. The category does not wait. He doesn't forgive. And if McLaren no longer acts with transparency, justice, and responsibility, what is at risk is not just one season. It is the relationship with your future. The real question is whether McLaren can regain the trust of a driver it has systematically failed. If he will be able to demonstrate that he is not willing to sacrifice one of his greatest talents in the name of a strategy that increasingly seems more unbalanced. Leave me your thoughts in the comments what you think of all this.